What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a little self-indulgent look into my world of avarice as I hunger for ever more content, which is a very strange way to say that today I want to talk a little bit about what could be next for the World of Eora, Pillars of Eternity, Avowed, that kind of thing. As I'm sure many of you know if you're watching a channel like this, Avowed just yesterday officially got its big anniversary update. Now, about a week before that, I had already put out a preview thanks to an exclusive look at it via Obsidian, and yet, with that anniversary update going live and us not exactly having the clearest picture of what comes next for that universe, I thought it would be fun to sort of touch base here and talk a little bit about what some of that at least could potentially look like. Now, we do have a little bit of official news, but it's not much. And everything barring that is obviously going to be pure speculation on my own part. But I had a few things to say, so here we are. Now, long story short, let's talk about the official stuff. So, Avowed has not received any sort of DLC announcement, given that it just got a 1-year anniversary update. I think it's safe to say it's probably not going to happen, and yet there have been rumors circulating basically since last November about Avowed 2 being potentially greenlit. Now, I say potentially because we do not have that from an official source. An ex-employee stated that that's something they were working on, but you got to take that kind of thing with a grain of salt. However, in the past couple of weeks, we've gotten some information that kind of sort of leans that way. About 2 weeks or so to the day, I think, Obsidian sat down with Bloomberg and talked a little bit about their 2025, which saw them releasing 3 games ultimately and what that was like. Now, the news everybody ran with there was about how Avowed and The Outer Worlds 2 didn't meet sales expectation. Very much par for the course, run-of-the-mill internet arguments. Long story short, though, The Outer Worlds 2 is not getting a sequel, but does have DLC that it's already committed to that should theoretically be out sometime this year. But apparently that one did not do well enough to warrant continued work on the franchise, frankly. But honestly, given how I think the second game was going to have an uphill battle trying to contend with, I would say, the sort of like viral publicity that the first game got after its initial announcement, following people being upset with Bethesda and everything, and the comparisons to Fallout, yada yada. Long story short, I enjoyed The Outer Worlds 2 personally, but I don't think Obsidian moving on from that franchise is really much of a surprise, to be honest. However, on the Pillars of Eternity World of Eora side of things, it was stated pretty clearly that Obsidian is still wanting to make more games within that universe. And while that's obviously nothing official, that to me seems likely then, if that's something they want to do, that it's probably something they would do. And as far as official stuff, that's pretty much it as far as what is coming next. However, as I mentioned, I had some things to say speculation-wise, which is what the rest of this video is going to be. Starting with, I think, probably the most obvious thing is what genre of game would that be? So we have the 2 Pillars of Eternity CRPGs and now Avowed. And while you, based on personal preference or bias, my own included even, may look at either one of those and be like, well, this is the way they would obviously go, and yet I don't think it's quite as simple as that without having eyes on the actual sales data. In a weird way, I actually think Pillars 2 and Avowed wound up in a similar boat in the sense that it would seem, while far from a disaster or anything, their initial sales were a bit soft, and people have come around on it. Pillars 2 very famously took a couple years to spin a profit, but eventually got there, and is doing well these days, and that is presumably why they went with the genre shift for something like Avowed to try that out and see how that went. And while initial sales seem to have been softer than what they were hoping for, this anniversary update seems to have been very positively received by people. It also launched on PlayStation, which should in and of itself bring in more sales. And I have a feeling it sold better than The Outer Worlds 2, just based on the fact that they're still interested in doing things with that, but that's also not really a guarantee in and of itself, given that the World of Eora is one of Obsidian's main franchises in the sense that it's their creation, alongside the fact that they've been doing a lot with it for a long time, whereas I would imagine it was simply easier to part ways with something like The Outer Worlds, where it was a more recent adventure that just obviously didn't have the staying power to be what they wanted it to be. All that to say, Pillars 2 and Avowed, at least from the outside looking in, seem to have done kind of similarly in terms of overall reception alongside initial sales figures. But this is where I would need actual hard sales data to go further. And obviously they're not about to give me that, so, here we are. So I've talked a few times about how I've, used to run businesses and stuff as part of my previous jobs. And one of the things I would do in a situation like this would be to look at said data. How far off was it from target? What were other factors that could have contributed to that? The obvious one being something like Game Pass, etc. There's been a lot of talk here lately about friction in terms of mechanics. That, being that jumping into a game and just having a great time immediately isn't bad, but also having to work for progression makes you a little more personally attached to it, which is something CRPGs in general do very well. So there would be some back and forth there about which way to go is my point, and given the rumors already point towards Avowed 2, unconfirmed as they are, of course, I don't think that's an impossible way to go, and truth be told, if anything, I think they could take the collective feedback they got from the release of Avowed and the stuff they've done to it afterwards, and potentially make a much more expansive sequel that I think, if anything, they really drilled down into the world interactivity and sandbox elements of it would likely make a lot more people happy, since that seemed to be the thing that people wanted from this game the most, that it just did not deliver on, and honestly didn't really seem to be trying to either. A lot of that was actually down to the initial trailer they showed for the game, which was an early CGI trailer, and then the mood and the tone of it and everything shifted. People's expectations got a little out of whack with what was actually going to happen, which, as much as I like Obsidian, it does seem to happen to them a lot. They tend to have early trailers of stuff, especially announcement trailers, that then fail to live up to the thing they actually deliver. A super relevant point there is the original Outer Worlds. All the marketing for that game was from the creators of Fallout, which very much gave everybody the impression that what they were getting was a Fallout-like game, and the Outer Worlds simply is not that. Not least of which because, again, it did not have that sort of world interactivity. So, to bring all of that to a more salient point, if I'm Obsidian and I'm shifting through all of this, I guess my approach from a zoomed out perspective would likely be something to the tune of, people clearly want that level of interactivity from our games. Why don't we try to deliver on that while also trying to grow this thing as a franchise that has a very dedicated fan base, if nothing else? And so I think an Avowed 2 that actually tries to drill down and address some of the things that people have wanted from the last few of Obsidian's games, or RPGs in particular. Grounded is obviously a little bit of a different case, but to me, that certainly seems like the logical way you would probably approach something like this. However, obviously Obsidian only really knows that for sure, and I am purely just guessing. But to start sort of wrapping this video up, as the stuff that we actually know for sure would tell us at the beginning of the video, I think another game set in the world of Eora is likely. Personally, as always, Pillars 3 would by far and away be my own personal preference, as I love CRPGs. I really want to see them directly continue that story, but at the same time I also don't think that building on the base of Avowed and simply trying to, again, give people the thing they wanted most from that game, or at least one of the chief complaints about it, would be some unreasonable approach for the series. The only thing I would be hesitant about within Avowed follow-up specifically is that as a bit of a spin-off, it doesn't follow up necessarily on some of the biggest lore things from the Pillars games specifically that I would want to know. And yet, at the very same time, it also introduces a bunch of lore of its own that is really interesting that I've covered in other videos. It would be gigantic spoilers for the sake of this one, so I'm not going to do that. However, regardless of which way they zig or zag on this, my personal biggest thing that I would really want is simply that I would really love one of these games to address some of these really big lore concepts. And obviously they don't want to do everything all in a single game and, not leave anything to the imagination, etc., etc. Pillars 2 ends on such a gigantic cliffhanger, and then Avowed follows up a few years later, but doesn't really obviously address the biggest impacts of that, as that's not what Avowed story is about per se. It is kind of sort of related in a sort of potential solution kind of way. However, I personally would just love a game that directly is dealing with the impact of the things that happen at the end of Pillars 2, but that is just my personal wishes at the end of the day. So, all told, I don't think Pillars 3 is any more likely than it has been the past couple of years. However, I do think another game set in this universe is certainly in the realm of possibility. Either way, though, that's pretty much going to do it for this particular video, so I certainly hope you enjoyed hearing me ramble all about that. I would be more than happy to hear all of your own thoughts and concerns about the subject down in the comment section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.